This isn't just another video crossing your feed by chance. This is a moment of profound alignment, where a question you've carried silently in your heart meets its answer. Not from outside, but from a place of deep knowing you've been learning to trust. If you feel you've been pointed toward an unfamiliar, winding road, you are not alone. To be called in this way doesn't mean you are better than anyone else. It means you can no longer find peace in the old stories you've told yourself. If you are listening now, it may be because the truest part of you has decided to stop pretending to look away. When we speak of a sacred signal, a divine whisper, we are not speaking only of religion. We are speaking of that inner compass, the core of your being, what psychology calls the self. This guidance does not only come from the heavens, it echoes within your own body, in your dreams, in that formless tension you keep trying to rationalize away. Your deeper mind knew something was out of alignment long before your conscious thoughts could accept it. And so often, that signal revolves around a very specific presence. A man. He may be thoughtful, profound, captivating. He may have felt like a sanctuary, a person who seemed to truly see you. Yet somewhere beneath your ribs, a quiet alarm pulses, a sense that something essential is not as it seems, a feeling you've swallowed, again and again. This conversation is not here to judge him. It is here to illuminate the hidden pattern that has been steering your emotional world. In our time together, we will move directly into these core questions. What is the true source of this magnetic pull? What is your inner guidance system trying to show you? And what becomes of your spirit if you continue to mute the signals you have been receiving? Because before we can understand who he is, we must confront a far more vital question. Who are you choosing to be in this narrative? The one who is acted upon, or the one who is being summoned to awaken? Stay until the end. The perspective you find may reshape how you see every significant connection in your life's story. The archetypal lens. Who is he, psychologically? First, let's name what your mind has been circling. We are speaking of a real person. A living, breathing man whose face or energy appears in your awareness the moment this topic is raised. It could be a former partner, a current relationship, a mentor, a spiritual guide, or even a connection that defies simple labels. What they share is this: his presence does not leave you neutral. It creates a mark, a resonance, for better or for worse. Through a psychological lens, we can view this figure in three distinct layers. Layer 1, the outer persona. This is the man as he appears in the world. A human being with a history, a personality, visible strengths, and visible wounds. On the surface, he may seem exceptionally compelling. He speaks with insight, listens with a depth that feels rare, asks questions that touch parts of you long dormant. He may command a room, or he may be the quiet, intense presence whose stillness feels more powerful than any word. You look at him and think, here is someone who truly gets me. That is where the dynamic takes root. At this level, you are primarily engaging with his persona, the social mask we all wear to navigate the world. His might be that of the wise guide, the devoted partner, the enlightened seeker. But a persona, by its nature, is a partial portrait. It conceals what lies beneath. Layer 2, the archetypal embodiment. Beneath the personal persona lies the realm of archetypes, ancient, universal patterns of human experience that live in the collective unconscious. This man is no longer merely an individual. He becomes a vessel for these deeper forces. He may be an expression of the trickster archetype, a boundary dweller who blurs truth and illusion, help and harm. Coupled with this is often a wounded masculine energy, an immature expression of power that seeks control to mask a hidden fragility. Notice, he rarely lies in obvious ways, but speaks in nuanced half-truths. He seldom attacks directly, but his words leave you questioning your own perception. He can discuss healing, growth, and spirit with sincerity, while simultaneously engaging in behaviors that cause deep fracture. In myth, we see this pattern in figures like Loki or Hermes, messengers who are also shapeshifters, standing precisely at the threshold between revelation and deception. Your real-world man operates similarly, inhabiting that same ambiguous borderland. Layer 3. The inner mirror. This is the most subtle and most personal layer. Here, he becomes a living mirror for a part of your own psyche. For a woman, psychology speaks of the animus, the inner masculine aspect, the voice of inner authority and action. If you are a woman, you may recognize this as an internal whisper that says, "You are not complete without this connection. Your intuition is just fear. No one else will ever understand you like he does." That voice is not yours alone. It is an inherited pattern, often shaped by early experiences with masculine figures. For a man, this figure may not be a romantic partner, but a male presence, a father, a boss, a rival, who inspires both admiration and a tightening in the chest. He embodies traits you feel you lack, or traits you secretly resent, reflecting your own relationship with your masculine development. This is the crucial and challenging psychological truth. The man who captivates and unsettles you is rarely a random occurrence. He is a living symbol, drawn from the outer world by your unconscious, to show you something vital about your inner world. Every moment of confusion, every pang of longing or pain in his presence, is touching an older story within you. Perhaps the first blueprint of love, worth, or safety you ever internalized. When your inner guidance sends a signal about him, the self is essentially pulling you toward this mirror and asking you to look, with courage, at what is being reflected back. Only when you see clearly who he is through this tri-lens can you begin to see the role you have been playing, the seeker of salvation, the appointed healer, or the one finally ready to reclaim authorship of their soul. So, if he is this mirror, this archetypal trigger, how exactly has your deeper mind been trying to get your attention? The methods are far more creative and persistent than you might think. The language of the unconscious, how the guidance arrives. How does this inner signal actually reach you? It is not a one-time event. Your unconscious has been sending messages for a long time. You have simply been trained to explain them away. The language of the deeper psyche is not logical or linear. It speaks through sensation, through image, through meaningful coincidence. The first channel, the body's intelligence. The initial warning often arrives as a physical sensation. A sudden tightness in your stomach as you read his message. A hollow feeling in your chest as he tells a story that doesn't quite align. A sense of exhaustion after an interaction that was supposed to be uplifting. You sit across from him, listening to him speak of his past pains, his noble struggles, and while your mind is engaged, a cold, quiet current runs beneath your ribs. A faint whisper says, "Wait." Your immediate, conditioned reaction? "I'm overthinking. I'm being too sensitive." And with that, you dismiss the first, most honest messenger you have, your own nervous system. From a psychological view, your body does not fabricate. It registers microsignals. A fleeting shift in the eyes that doesn't match the smile. A tonal undercurrent that belies the words. Subtle inconsistencies that the conscious mind overlooks, but the animal self records. When you return home feeling heavy, drained, or agitated for no clear reason, that is not nothing. That is the self, knocking on the door of your awareness. The second channel, the dream world. When the body's language is ignored, the unconscious shifts to a more vivid medium. Dreams. You may not dream of him directly, but the emotional atmosphere is unmistakable. You dream of being lost in a labyrinthine building. You dream of being a passenger in a car speeding down a dark road, feeling terrified but unable to speak up. You dream of searching for something precious you know you've lost. In the symbolic language of dreams, these are not random scenes. The endless building is your own psyche, feeling maze-like and without exit. The car where someone else is driving is a potent symbol of relinquished control over your own direction. Dreams are the secret letters your soul writes to your waking self, offering pictures of your inner state when words fail. The third channel, synchronicity. This is where the outer world seems to conspire to deliver a message. You open a social media app, and a post about emotional patterns appears, outlining dynamics identical to yours. You pick up a book at random, and your eyes fall on a sentence. Sometimes the person you can't let go of is the lesson you need to release. You overhear a stranger in a cafe say, "You teach people how to love you by what you tolerate." You shrug it off. What a coincidence. But in a psychological framework, these are not mere accidents. Synchronicity, as defined, is a meaningful coincidence that bridges inner and outer worlds. When your psyche is fixated on a particular frequency, a question, a wound, a pattern, it begins to attract outer events that resonate with that same frequency. The universe isn't targeting you. Your own awakened awareness is pulling relevant symbols into your field of vision. The signals become denser, clearer, harder to ignore. The final, unmistakable channel, repeating patterns. Perhaps the most profound signal is the eerie sense of familiarity. You begin to see that this man is not an isolated chapter. Before him, there was another connection with a similar emotional flavor. Before that, another. The names, faces, and circumstances change, but the underlying melody, the feeling of striving to prove your worth, of navigating uncertainty, of loving with a hint of desperation, remains hauntingly the same. This is the core of the matter. As the saying goes, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Each iteration of this pattern is a soul-level question, presented to you again this time. Will you choose differently? The important thing to understand is this. The guidance escalates in clarity and intensity the longer it is dismissed. It begins as a whisper in the body, becomes a picture in a dream, then a sign in the world, and finally, the unavoidable truth of your own recurring history. It will not stop. It will only ask louder, often through a loss of vitality, through sleeplessness, anxiety, or a mind trapped in loops about one person. So I invite you to reflect. Honestly, what has your body felt in his presence? What dream images have you hurried to forget? What coincidences have you brushed aside as overthinking? And how many times have you stood at this exact crossroads, knowing the terrain feels familiar, yet promising yourself, this time, it will be different? Yet this raises the most painful and crucial question of all. If the warnings are there, why does the pull feel so impossibly strong? The answer lies not in his magnetism, but in your own ancient history. The source of the pull, why you are drawn to this specific energy. So we arrive at the heart of the paradox. If the unconscious is signaling caution, why does the attraction feel so compelling, so inevitable? The psychological answer does not begin with him. It begins with the foundational imprints within you. For many, the original template was set with a primary male figure, often the father. This is not about blame, but about pattern recognition. He may not have been a bad father. He may have been absent, busy, emotionally distant, or inconsistently available. You learned, as a child, a subtle formula. I must be more, underscore, underscore, underscore. Wyatt, accomplished, helpful, understanding to secure connection, to feel seen, to be worthy of love. Your unconscious, loyal to that early blueprint, later seeks out relational dynamics that feel familiar, even if they are painful. It is drawn to the emotional landscape it knows how to navigate. When you meet this man, you may not think of your father at all, but your nervous system recognizes the rhythm, the intermittent warmth, the puzzling withdrawal, the high stakes of performing correctly to receive care. There is a strange, painful comfort in it. It feels like home, even if home was a place where you felt unseen. The pull is the pull of the wound, hoping for a different ending. If I can finally get it right with this person, the old ache will be healed. If you feel safe to, you might ask yourself right now, who, from my past, does this dynamic most remind me of? You don't need to say it aloud, just let the name and the first associated feeling arise. The act of honest recognition is, itself, a powerful step in reclaiming your story. In psychological terms, these unhealed wounds crystallize into complexes, clusters of emotions, memories, and beliefs that live in the unconscious. A complex is like a charged psychic knot. When this man speaks or acts in a certain way, he isn't just being himself, he is pressing directly on that knot. Your intense reaction is not just to him, but to the entire history stored within that complex. This is the great irony. The very complexes that cause you pain are also the source of the felt chemistry. When he shares his vulnerabilities, the part of you that longs to heal and be the special one lights up. You enter not just as a partner, but as a redeemer. And what could make the ego feel more significant than that? But a wise guide would caution, whenever you find yourself cast as the sole savior in someone's narrative, pause. A complex is likely directing the play. Another layer is projection. You look at him and see depth, strength, authenticity, power. Ask yourself, are these not also qualities you possess, but have perhaps disowned, minimized, or been afraid to embody fully? He becomes the screen onto which you project your own unlived potential. You are drawn, in part, to the lost parts of yourself you see reflected in him. Finally, there is the fear of emptiness, of the unknown. What is familiar, even when it's painful, can feel safer than the vast quiet of an uncharted path. If your nervous system is accustomed to the adrenaline of uncertainty, the roller coaster of hope and disappointment, then a calm, consistent, healthy love may initially feel boring. It lacks the familiar charge. This man offers the precise emotional rhythm, the intermittent reinforcement that your system has been conditioned to expect. It is an addiction to a certain kind of story. So when you ask, why can't I let go? Be wary of surface answers. The deeper inquiry is, which early wound does this dynamic echo? Which complex is being activated? Which disowned parts of myself have I placed upon him? When you dare to answer these, the mysterious magnetism begins to lose its power. It transforms from a spell he cast into a map he provided. A map leading directly back to the parts of your soul, asking for your attention, your healing, and your reclamation. This reframes everything. What we often call a warning is not about him being bad. It is about you being called toward a more complete version of yourself. So what then is the true nature of this guidance? IV. The nature of the guidance. A psychological perspective. People may frame this as a warning from a divine source, but through a psychological lens. This divinity is the voice of your own deepest integrity, the self, attempting to correct your course, to bring you back to your own axis. The founder of this psychology was always careful with the word. He was less concerned with theological debate and more with the image of the sacred as it operates within the human psyche. Each person carries an innate symbol of wholeness, an inner center that orchestrates growth. He called this the self. When we say something is warning you, he might say, the self is speaking because your conscious ego has drifted too far from its authentic path. Notice, true inner signals don't only flash when a dangerous person appears. They flicker whenever you live too long in contradiction to your own truth. In a soul-deadening job, in a role that requires you to shrink, in any dynamic where you must abandon parts of yourself to survive. At those times, your psyche rebels. Sleep becomes fitful. Joy feels muted. Laughter rings hollow. So why does this particular signal use the image of this man? Because the self does not communicate in abstract principles. It uses the people and situations of your life as perfect, if painful, mirrors. This man, with all his complexity, is the instrument your soul is using to show you a foundational truth. You have been outsourcing your sense of worth. You have been waiting for an external verdict to feel complete. Traditional frameworks might use language of sin, judgment, or punishment. The psychological path asks a different question. What purpose does this experience serve in your journey toward becoming who you truly are? When a relationship unravels you, but in doing so, exposes your core wounds and forces you to seek healing, to question everything, to rebuild, then from the perspective of the self, this is not merely a disaster. It is a necessary, albeit brutal, turning point. The warning is, in essence, an urgent invitation. You cannot remain at this current level of awareness. A deeper integration is required. This guidance is not meant to make you small or afraid. Its purpose is to foster radical self-honesty. Heard through a lens of guilt, it feels like condemnation. Heard through a lens of growth, it feels like a chance to stop betraying yourself. Pain in this view is not meaningless suffering. It is often the necessary force that shatters an outgrown version of the self, creating space for a wider, truer identity to emerge. The warning is the moment the old self-image, I am the one who saves, who endures, who is not enough, stops working, and a new knowing insists on being born. I am someone who has the right to safety, to peace, to a life that exists outside of this story. If you see this signal only as a red flag over his head, you may stop at anger, blame, or fearful avoidance. But if you see it through this psychological lens, you recognize it as a verdict passed on an old pattern, and a liberation offered to you. And what if you choose again to postpone that liberation? The cost is not measured in moral terms, but in the slow, quiet currency of your own psyche. V. The cost of postponing the awakening. What happens if you continue to ignore this inner summons? We are not speaking of sin, but of a psychological price that will be extracted, with compound interest. The first cost, the erosion of self. The initial price is not losing him. It is slowly, imperceptibly, losing you. When you entered this dynamic, you possessed a clearer sense of I. These are my boundaries. These are my values. This is what I will accept. To remain in proximity to someone who consistently tests those lines, you begin to adjust. You overlook a subtle disrespect. You rationalize an unexplained absence. You defend his behavior to confused friends. Each adjustment is a tiny fracture in your inner foundation. Over time, you can no longer recall who you were before this dance began. The outline of your own identity grows faint. The second cost, the trap of the drama triangle. You sink deeper into a distorted relational script, cycling between three unconscious roles: victim, persecutor, and rescuer. With this man, you may feel the victim, misunderstood, punished by silence, your reality denied. Then, flipping to the rescuer, only I can understand his pain. If I leave, he'll be lost. And from accumulated hurt, you may become the persecutor, accusing, controlling, checking, becoming a version of yourself you don't recognize. It is an exhausting, closed loop with no exit. The third and deepest cost, the gaslighting of the soul. This is the most profound betrayal. Every time your gut says no and your mouth says okay, you send a message to your core self. Your feelings cannot be trusted. Every time you excuse a hurtful action, you whisper, this is what you deserve. Over time, you no longer require anyone else to distort your reality. You learn to do it to yourself. You become both the prisoner and the warden, severing the connection to your own inner compass. When the guidance is repeatedly silenced, it seeks louder, more somatic channels. Unexplained anxiety, panic, chronic fatigue, insomnia, or physical pains with no clear medical cause can emerge. From a depth perspective, these are not just stress symptoms. They are the soul's final desperate protests when its whispers have been consistently overruled. The dangerous culmination is this. After a long cycle of ignoring your own truth, you may finally leave, but in a state of profound cynicism. The lesson you internalize is not "I need to trust myself," but love is an illusion. All connections are dangerous. The price is paid not only against your past, but against your future. You build walls to keep out pain, but walls cannot discern. They also keep out the healthy, nourishing connections that might have come. You escape the situation, but you lose faith in your own capacity to navigate intimacy at all. This is not said to instill fear, but to bring stark clarity. Staying does not mean preserving your wholeness. It means trading the acute, clean pain of ending something for the chronic, dull ache of living against your own grain. One is the sharp pain of surgery. The other is the slow, systemic infection. Choosing to avoid the operation today is agreeing to carry a ticking clock within your own being. As it was once written, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Ignoring the call is the attempt to imagine light, while the inner darkness grows denser and more commanding. To look this psychological cost in the eye is not to terrify you, but to prompt one honest question. What currency am I willing to spend my selfhood on? Sometimes, that single question is the pivot point. The moment you stop, turn, and for the first time in a very long time, choose to stand squarely on your own side. Thank you for staying with these challenging truths. The fact that you are still listening is itself a signal. It means a part of you is more committed to your own awakening than you may have dared to believe. Stay just a while longer, because what follows is no longer about the cost of ignoring the call, but about the practical, step-by-step path of answering it. How to walk away without abandoning yourself one more time. And if what you've heard has given language to something you've felt but never named, then let that be your sign. The next part is the map for the journey home. VI. Answering the call, the path of psychological integration. True psychology does not stop at diagnosing the wound. Its ultimate aim is integration, the conscious weaving together of the fragmented parts into a more whole being. So, from this point of seeing, what do you do? Maturity, in this tradition, begins not with a grand external gesture, but with a simple, internal turn, the willingness to pause and look inward. Step 1. The pause for observation. Before sending another text, before rehashing the story, create a deliberate stillness. With a pen and paper, write not to justify or blame, but to observe. Ask concrete, non-judgmental questions. When was the very first moment my body felt tension around this? What specific situations make that feeling intensify? What is the oldest memory this dynamic touches? Let the answers be raw, fragmented, and uncensored. This act alone begins the vital work of bringing the unconscious into the light of awareness. Step 2. Reclaiming your projections. Shift the obsessive question from "what is he doing?" to "what part of me have I placed onto him?" Try this exercise. Draw 2 columns. In the first, list every quality you admire or are drawn to in him. In the second, list every trait that frustrates, hurts, or repels you. Then, for each item, ask, is this a potential within myself that I have not yet owned or embodied? Or is it a disowned shadow aspect I try to avoid in myself? This process does not excuse harmful behavior. It liberates you from the spell of projection, returning your energy and attention to your own development. Step 3. Relearning the soul's language. Begin a conscious dialogue with your unconscious. Keep a dream journal, even if you recall only a feeling or an image. Ask of each dream, what state of my inner life does this picture represent? Beyond dreams, try active imagination. Write a dialogue between you and your inner child, or between you and that critical inner voice. Let the conversation flow without censorship. You may be stunned by the wisdom that emerges from what feels like a voice not entirely your own. This is the unconscious beginning to communicate directly, now that you are finally listening. Step 4. The architecture of boundaries. Inner work must eventually manifest in outer action. Boundaries are not necessarily about dramatic cutoffs, though sometimes they are. They begin as small, firm acts of self-respect. Not answering messages when you are emotionally flooded. Not accepting late-night calls that serve as his emotional outlet while draining you. Not rearranging your life to accommodate his inconsistencies. Prepare a few clear, calm phrases. I need some space to process my own thoughts. That doesn't work for me. I am not available for that. Say them. Then withstand the wave of guilt or anxiety that follows. That is the old pattern fighting for survival. This is your new psychological muscle being forged. Step 5. Ritual to mark the transition. The human psyche understands rites of passage. Create a simple, private ritual to signal to your whole being that a chapter is closing. Write a long, detailed letter to him, containing every hurt, longing, and insight, and then burn it or bury it, releasing the story from your active mind. Gather physical artifacts of the connection, photos, gifts, notes, and place them in a box, out of daily sight. You are not erasing history. You are respectfully archiving it, making space for a new narrative to begin. Step 6. Rebuilding around the self. The long-term task is to construct a life oriented around your own center, not around another person's orbit. This is practical. It means instituting small, non-negotiable daily practices. A morning walk, 5 minutes of silence, journaling 3 pages, not for show, but as a message to your soul. My life has its own rhythm and value, independent of anyone's presence or absence. Consciously reconnect with relationships that feel genuinely nourishing and safe, reminding your nervous system what steady, reciprocal connection feels like. If possible, seek a guide, a therapist or counselor versed in depth psychology, to help you navigate the deeper layers you are now brave enough to explore. The ultimate goal was beautifully stated. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Answering the inner call is not merely about leaving a painful dynamic. It is the long, courageous journey of becoming more honest, more responsible, and more compassionate toward yourself. Every time you honor a feeling you used to suppress, every time you say no to what harms you, every time you reclaim a projection and see the other person more clearly, and yourself more wholly, you grow. You mature in the eyes of your own soul. And from that place of greater integration, your future choices will no longer be dictated by ancient wounds, but by a clearer, steadier, more authentic understanding of who you are meant to become. If you have journeyed this far with these words, then something within you has already shifted. The story is no longer solely about a man or a relationship. It has become a story about a summons, a call back to the sovereignty of your own spirit. This guidance, viewed through a psychological lens, was never just about avoiding a painful chapter. It is the moment you step out of a familiar fog and realize you have been living inside a narrative far too small for the vastness of your soul. You do not need to have all the answers. You do not need a perfect plan. It is enough if, starting now, you simply decide to stop rushing to explain away what your body knows, to stop justifying what your heart recognizes as hurt, to stop naming your deepest intuition as a flaw. It is enough if you begin to see the people who pass through your life not merely as fate or fortune, but as sacred mirrors, each one showing you where you stand on the epic journey of becoming yourself. And beyond all the turmoil, there is a quiet point of arrival. It is the place where you stop asking, "How do I make this work?" and instead begin to ask a different question, one that is calmer, firmer, and carries the weight of true power. How do I ensure I never again lose the thread of my own being? From that question, a new life is already beginning.